Let's take a look at attribute relationships, and we'll look at this in the context of building a user hierarchy. This is probably the situation where you're going to get the most amount of bang for the buck on getting your hierarchies correct, and the place where you're probably going to get the most warnings and error messages. So it's a really good place to look at this. So we built this user hierarchy by just dragging some attributes in, and we got a couple of warning messages. One of them says that attribute relationships don't exist between year and month, and therefore this will result in decreased performance. And that's because without attribute relationships, we're going to be expecting the engine to go out and pull in scads more information than it needs in order to answer this query, because we haven't given it hints as to how things relate to each other. Let's take a look at what the attribute relationships within this dimension are right now. And we do that on the attribute relationships tab, which is very well named. On this tab, we can see all of the attributes in this gigantic dimension. The way to think about this is that every attribute has to get back to the table's key somehow. The question is, what attributes does it go through in order to get there? By default, every attribute is related just to the actual key within that table. Where we have hierarchical relationships, we have to establish them in this tab. But not only do we have to establish them in this tab, we have to make sure that the keys actually work. And that's going to be a lot easier to understand after we do the first step here, because I'm actually going to do this a halfway job on this, and you'll see that it's not going to work. For beginners designing hierarchies and working out attribute relationships, what I'm about to do is probably your most common error. So let's go ahead and do it. So what I have to do with these arrows is draw a path from the date key, which is the most granular key in their entire table, up to the year. But I want that to go through the month to the year. That's the missing attribute relationship that this warning is telling us about. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to collapse that. And I'm going to delete the attribute relationship that goes from the date key directly to the year. Let's hit the delete key there, by the way. Now I have no relationship whatsoever. So that's even worse, because I have a red squiggly line that says there's no relationship back to date key. To relate it through month, I'm going to highlight the month and then hold down my left mouse button, drag over here to the year. So now the red should go away, and I can see that the calendar year does get back to the date key through the month. A couple other things I can do here is change my relationship type. Basically, flexible and rigid. Flexible means that the month might change for a date, or the year might change for a month. Now, we know that in the calendar that doesn't really happen. If it's January 3rd, 1982, then the month is always going to be January. So we can actually say that's rigid. It never changes. By setting these to rigid, it actually will help the engine in certain circumstances to optimize the performance of incremental cube processing in a few different areas. So the rule of thumb is to go ahead and mark those rigid if they really, really are, but no guessing. If it might not be rigid, then don't mark it that way. You could actually wind up with invalid aggregations sometime down the road. So if I go back to my dimension structure, I can see my warning is gone. So I would assume everything is perfect. It's just perfect, and it's all going to work, right? And let's see if that's true. So let's go and redeploy this to get the changes out to the server and reprocess. So after the process completes, it has failed. And this is the part that'll drive you nuts. So scroll down, and explaining these errors a little bit, you'll get a lot of these errors are basically just saying that this attribute failed because something else failed. So you've got to dig a little bit in here, but the real error is this duplicate attribute key. And what this is telling us is that there was a duplicate attribute key when processing from dim date the column calendar month int. Kind of ignore those little codings in there. And what that tells us is that there's just something not right with our attribute relationship. Well, that's obvious, but what's not right? The key here, and the part that'll drive you crazy, is that you need to keep the attribute relationships in sync with your index keys of your attributes. So if I look at cal month in the properties, and I come down here, the key column is the month int, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. But I have a January for every year in the entire date dimension. So just the calendar month really isn't the full key. The real key is actually the year and the month together. Again, here's my relationship. So that month is going to occur multiple times when it's built. It's going to occur once for each year. So it's not true that just the calendar month is unique. So how do I fix that? Well, the easiest way to fix that is to go ahead and add a composite key to this. So for every year, I'll get a month. That's a 2-column key. So I'll click on calendar month, go to properties, select the key columns, and I'll push over the calendar year. I'm going to put that on the top. So for every year, I'll have a month. Now this is going to result in a unique value for January in each year. So I'll click OK. And that's the only change I need to make to fix this problem. So now my attribute relationships and my keys are in sync with each other. So I'll save my solution and deploy. Reprocess the dimension once again. Now that my processing is completed successfully, I can go and check and just make sure that my hierarchy is still working. And I can see it looks good here. And I'm done.